This is radiant fire ice, radiant fire ice, radiant fire ice tonight. It's radiant tonight. It's radiant, very radiant fire ice tonight. The night of this night, tonight of every night of the radiant fire ice. It's like gold tonight. It's like radiant bronze tonight. It's like the psychic of the night, psychic of the night, psychic, very psychic of the night, very psychic. You might say it's radiant fire ice, 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 radiant fire ice. Tonight, radiant fire ice, radiant fire ice, radiant, very radiant, very radiant fire ice, very radiant, very radiant, very radiant fire ice, very radiant, radiant to the core, radiant to the core, radiant, radiant fire ice, radiant fire to the ice, radiant fire to the ice, radiant fire 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 ice, radiant, very radiant, like psychic tonight, psychic, psychic, radiant to the psychic to the night, radiant to the psychic to the night, radiant, very radiant of the night, psychic to the core, psychic to the core, psychic, very psychic to the core of the radiant fire ice. Radiant fire ice is like radiant water tonight, radiant water, radiant water, radiant water. It's radiant still, radiant still, radiant still, radiant still, radiant still, radiant, very radiant fire ice, very radiant, very radiant, very radiant fire ice, very radiant fire ice, very radiant fire ice.